Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm filling in for Yasmin, so you're not going to get such a great speech here. But what I would like to do is to introduce Romola, who is a friend and I've known for many, many years. And in a nutshell, I would say that Romola is the coordinator of a group called the Circle of All Nations. And they really do protect the legacy of William Commanda, who died in 2011 and was an Order of Canada recipient and worked very, very deeply on Indigenous issues, especially in the Ottawa area. So the issues that she deals with are environmental and earth issues from an Indigenous perspective with regards to a global ecological community. Romola has a PhD in geography from Carleton University, and her thesis was dealing with the environmental legacy of William Commanda. And so she's currently working on Indigenous priorities, social justice, peace building. Respect for Mother Earth is very big in her work, and has a passion for youth and youth care work. She has written a couple of books on William Commanda. She's currently in a postdoc phase of her life regarding the history of William Commanda and the Circle of All Nations at Carleton University. So I would like you to welcome Romola. You have to use the microphone for that.
Okay. Thank you, Paul, for that introduction. Thank you, Yasmin, in your absence, for inviting me to join you all. And thank you all for welcoming me here today. I've had an opportunity to speak with many of you and to realize I actually know some of you. So a pleasure to see you again, and thank you for this interest. I do have a formal PowerPoint presentation for such a formal group as you are, but I thought I'd start off with just doing a tiny bit of a storytelling theme. So you'll follow the thread of my work. I was asked to talk about environment and climate change, and initially the caption read Indigenous approaches, and I asked at the last minute when I realized that to note that this was a Circle of All Nations presentation on the Indigenous elder William Commanda perspectives on climate change and environment. So there will be no confusion that I'm assuming the voice or place of Indigenous peoples in this process. And so I'll introduce myself a little bit further by saying it's actually the Indigenous trickster who comes into play in my identity. Because, in fact, I'm East Indian, but as someone was noting earlier, really not from North American Indian, as most people have known the Canadian Indians in time. I'm from South Africa, but I'm not African, and that sometimes gets confusing. When I've sat with William Commanda at different stages and noted how I'm a proud and hardworking Canadian. In fact, I used to be a public servant, and I used to think that was a great honor to be serving this country that had adopted me in such a way. When I sat with him, I began to realize the first peoples of this land were not as well positioned in their own land. And it made me question that. It made me question that especially when the Chinese people were celebrating 50 years since they had gotten the right to vote in Canada. And of course I knew, because I'd studied humanities for so long, I knew about the racist history that had haunted the Chinese people here in Canada. But I have to say, sitting beside an Indigenous elder and having another immigrant group celebrating having the right to vote, and realizing he was having little choice and little say in how his country evolved, made me question that Canadian identity. And here's one for you guys, Club of Rome. And my name is actually Romola. It means Lady of Rome. It means stately. But of course, though I have driven 2,329 miles across Italy, I'm not Italian. And out of that kind of mixed bag of an identity, I actually come largely from the world of prisons. I've done a lot of time. I've worked actually everywhere in the criminal justice system. And I worked in parole. I worked in maximum, minimum, and supermax prisons. I worked in regional headquarters, national headquarters. But it was actually my introduction to Aboriginal justice that taught me really, really, really what the justice system was about and why some of the ongoing issues that we are challenged with right now continue to be part of our struggle. It was that work that brought me to Elder William Commanda. And so in this presentation, which I'll get to shortly, I'm really wanting to share more about the ideology of Indigenous peoples as transmitted to me via Elder Commanda and many other elders across the country, and then to the animation of that ideology. I come from South Africa, and we talk about Ubuntu. I am because you are, and we're really, impacted a lot of thinkers with that ideology. But Elder Commanda's word is actually Jinawe Daganuk, and it means something more. It means that we're all interconnected, we're all interrelated, but we're interrelated as well with nature. And that is a fundamental notion that he awakened me to. I, coming from the Durban beach, knew about beautiful beaches, talk about wonderful sunsets and great landscape. He would talk about a Mother Earth. And in time, I began to understand the relational difference in his thinking and mine. And that was a significant wake-up. So his people occupied this area in the post-glacial period. And as they moved into this area, as the glaciers, the ice retreated, so they developed language for a new landscape, language that hadn't existed before, because they were coming to terms with a new space, a new physical world. And the Algonquin language of the people of the Ottawa River watershed is deemed the prototype language of the people and is visible in dialects that span the continent of North America. 84 dialects and 84 nations spanning North America is what William Commanda said. And he went to California at one stage in his journey and was able to talk with the Chumash people over there in their language. So he was able to affirm, really, this is true. And I just recently learned that the Chumash people and the people from Baja California share a similar rooted language, so it spreads into Central America and beyond. Anyway, out of that language came an identity of movement. He described himself as Mami Winini. And he meant by that we move every day. He meant by that we knew, we understood our land. And out of that then comes a philosophy that includes the ideas of journey. These ideological thoughts evolved out of the Indigenous understanding of the laws of nature. So they were guided then in their development of their thought processes and their philosophy and their way of living and being by the laws of nature. They're consistent with the laws of nature. And they then articulated this knowledge in the kinds of things we talk about at Carleton as methods and methodological tools and things like that. And these were then the canoe-making heritage, the carving on petroglyphs, the painting on rocks, the pictographs. These were then the mechanisms that recorded their stories. And in the picture you saw a little while ago of William holding a three-figure wampum belt, the stories, the heritage, the thinking, the knowledge was embedded in the wampum heritage history. So coming out of that then, ideology, the animation, the way William animated his beliefs then began actually in 1945 when he and other indigenous peoples approached the United Nations and began to petition for the place of indigenous peoples. So the civil rights movement didn't exactly start in the 60s. The precedent was William Commanda himself and his friend, Joe Siwi, leader of the North American Indian Nations government, actually going to the United Nations and saying, at that stage, something that would have been rather challenging but rather interesting to the Secretary General, Tocqueville, why are the immigrants sitting in our seats? And he was talking about the leadership of Canada and the US. Growing out of many years of raising the voice of the indigenous peoples to both their responsibilities to their land, the reclamation of their history, William Commanda then also served his community as chief. And he met Prime Minister Trudeau in 1968 when he wanted to be affirmed by the First Nations as he assumed his new responsibility as the Prime Minister of Canada. And the Prime Minister decided that he and William ought to share this plate of beans at the community of Maniwaki. And there's a famous photograph showing both of them doing that. And in fact, it symbolizes really the energy of the three-figure wampum belt, which I'll show you again in a minute, where in William's beliefs, the Indian in the center welcomed the newcomers. In those days, the French and the English. But now we could say, you know, the old settlers and the new immigrants like myself. There are many ways to configure it, the provinces, the territories, whatever, but the indigenous in the center. The wampum record, capturing the oral story in this mnemonical form, includes also the symbol of the Vatican, indicating that this was a sacred agreement. This agreement to share the grand natural resources of their country, to share their values in equal portions with the newcomers. And this wampum belt was created before the 1700s. So it was before there was a Canada that these ideologies were imparted. In 1967, William hosted his first gathering at Eganville. Yes, where there are those rocks from the Ordovician period, the ancient landscape. And it was also the 100th birthday of Canada. And so William Commanda was, on the one hand, affirming that welcome to everybody, at the same time as he recognized that many people were already in big need of healing. So it was also a healing gathering, and it was grounded in the earth, so it was a gathering to awaken people to the earth and the laws of nature. In 1969, he hosted such a gathering in Maniwaki. It was the first time that he brought 1,500 indigenous peoples from across North America together. They had a huge circle, and someone did actually take a photograph of these 1,500 people. But there you see he was building the voice and the strength of indigenous peoples. It was curtailed, of course, by some of the challenges that came after, and we've talked about that then, the imposition of other forms of rule, some of it via the Indian Act and things like that, which have resulted in ongoing challenges for the position of indigenous peoples here. Now to focus more on the environment theme that we're talking about, in 1987, coming out of the political activities, Canada was required to host a conference, 4 conferences with indigenous peoples. the Aboriginal conferences. And Prime Minister Mulroney led this in 1987. William Commanda brought out his wampum bells. And his primary concern at that point was the pollution, the condition of the air, the condition of the earth. And he said to all the premiers and federal leadership there, we depend on you to clean this up before the end of time. And that is when I say he made a statement about the environment on the national stage, though we'd already been aware of and agitating for change earlier. Of course, he didn't entirely wait on the leadership to take care of things. He kept working at it in his own way. In 1991, he was the elder at the pre-Rio summit in Paris, called by President Mitterrand. And this was when the world at large was awakening to the environmental crises. And at this stage then, politicians, political leaders, and environmentalists wanted to manage the resources of the grand natural world more judiciously. But William Commanda did 3 days of pipe ceremonies in Paris. And what he brought into the story was a relationship with Mother Earth. And maybe 10, 15 years later, someone came from Australia to one of our gatherings and remembered this event in Paris. So it obviously impacted people. Then, in 1993, the United Nations for the first time hosted a conference on Indigenous peoples. And the Indigenous peoples called it the Cry of the Earth. William Commanda offered the opening presentations, and he did his presentation in Algonquin language. And he had his helper translate him into English. And that was a very pointed move on his part, because he grew up speaking French first, English next, and Algonquin. So he was fully trilingual. But he was making a point about Indigenous languages and their relevance, because he described his language as vast. And you remember I said earlier, so a language that evolved out of the earth. And it held the vastness of its earth. And it held thoughts then that couldn't be contained in languages that were not so vast. Last year, UNESCO declared the year for Indigenous languages. So we see some of those seeds maturing and taking form now. Then so then the next momentous moment was the release of the report on the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples in 1996. And again, William's concern was with the environment. He took a cup with him to the presentation of the reports at Victoria Island, right here in the capital city, and he asked who'd be prepared to drink the water from the river. And his point was really that the salvation, the strengthening of the Indigenous peoples was intricately intermixed with environmental issues and the protection of the water. So over the next many years, he hosted many gatherings to raise awareness about the 4 themes that Paul mentioned, Mother Earth and the Indigenous approach to the environment, social justice, peace building, healing, and continue to do this type of work. He hosted a Millennium Conference on Peace, where we had delegates from all over the world buying into this vision for the creation of a circle of all nations, a culture of peace. He developed a vision for an Indigenous healing and peace-building center in Ottawa at the sacred Chaudière site on Victoria Island, and involving freeing the Chaudière Falls to the extent possible, and seeing it as an eco-think tank on a larger scale than our afternoon together over here, so that a diversity of people could be cognizant of the issues that are so important to all of us, and ignite a legacy of hope for future generations. He was actually in South Africa when 9/11 happened. We were sitting in the Sandton Center Mall a little bit before that, and he noted a pile of leaves blowing around, and he said, something bad has happened for the world. And when we came back to my sister's place and found the news on the television, we realized that something bad of an enormous scale had happened, because though there have been bad things that have happened over the world over the centuries, this one was of global impact. And all children who have grown up since then carry a kind of fear that the rest of us do not have anymore. So in fact, our circumstances have transformed considerably. And out of that, he just became more passionate about his vision for this center, which would bring people together to think about environmental issues, to think about peace issues, and to co-create strategies. So that is very much the work of the Circle of All Nations. It's bridge building and co-creating strategies by explaining and translating some of the thinking behind it. And with respect then to what I'll show you just now in some of our models, we build our work around the medicine wheel. And with respect to the environmental issues, some of our work is a prayer for fire. And years ago, we were involved in the uranium issue. And I use that as a symbol of our research and work into the power of nature contained in that element. We were asked to help stop a mega dump in Danford Lake in Quebec at one point. Now, at this stage, I come from prisons, knew very little about the environment, and thought I had to research this. But instead, Grandfather Commanda decided he was going to buy me a kayak. So that is what we ended up doing. But he knew it was only by experiencing the water at that level that I would understand the implications of a mega dump on the water system. When it came to then the spirit of the water and the reflections, people were protesting at a certain stage the creation of yet another logging road near Moira Lake, because this was the pathway of the loons. This was one of the migratory stopping places of the loons. And by just cutting into the mountain to save the truckers a few feet of land of driving, they would have impacted that species. So I say that was our prayer for reflection. And our final prayer, of course, was for seeing the Chaudière Dam undammed to the extent possible, to see it as a symbol of reconciliation with Mother Earth, to lead to reconciliation amongst all of us, and support the reconciliation amongst First Nations peoples, First Peoples, I should say. And finally, the urgency of the issue is underlined by our prayer for the eel, the American eel on the endangered species list. So that's how I tie in the environment to our overall work. But now I'm going to fast forward you through our presentation. Yes. In part, my work is supported and informed by what I'm learning in geography now at Carleton University, though the bulk of my learning has really actually been in the environment with William Commanda, who said we must come together with one heart, one mind, one love, and one determination to create a Circle of All Nations culture of peace. And so I wrote this book that I was showing somebody, Learning from a Kindergarten Dropout. I wrote it in 2005, and shortly after that, University of Ottawa decided to present him with his first honorary degree. And then Quebec Outaouais presented him with another one. Later, he was nominated for the Order of Canada, but they decided to appoint him Officer of the Order of Canada. And the next photograph is of William doing the prayer for the Landmines Treaty, the one that Princess Diana put a lot of heart and spirit into awakening us to. The other is William doing a prayer at the Victoria Island, water. And then finally, when he received his honorary degree, he did deliver the convocation speech. There were lots of young people there, but the party in the evening was all Williams. He was really well loved by folk. Now, so this is what I have hoped I will have been sharing with you, the themes for today's presentation, and I'm going to go fast through it because I don't think I have so much of time. But I've talked a little bit about the ideological foundations, the canoe journeys, the relations, the laws of nature, the process of evolution through time, the circle of all nations, bridge building, the kindergarten dropout, moving into the academia and sharing the knowledge and wisdom of Indigenous peoples, the spiritual trajectory to knowledge, and then finally to the work that we're doing right now, the digital mapping and reflection. And how is these ideas animated, come out of the activism from the 40s and 50s to the awakening of people at the gathering in Eganville, to the sharing of perspectives on Mother Earth and climate change, to impacting the Sustainable Development Agenda of the United Nations. We thought about that. You know, many of you I know already are federal public servants in the past or present. And after the conference in Rio, we were all obliged to pay attention to sustainable development and put in action plans in our plans. But I don't think we actually really understood what that was about in most departments, and me too, guilty. But after I understood William's work better, I began to understand it was about relationship. So we started to talk about sustainable relations. And I think there's a course at University of Ottawa that appropriated our word. But that's really what we want other people to think about. William served as elder for the Sunbow 5 Walk across North America, from First Encounter Bay, Massachusetts, to Santa Barbara, California, to raise awareness about Indigenous as well as environmental issues. I mentioned the RCAP and things like that. Okay, so maybe it takes a second to present itself. Okay, so I went back to school to study him so that his honorary degree could be substantiated against the knowledge of Western science and studies. So I think it's the relational issues, how they've informed contemporary debates on Indigenous and non-Indigenous relations and thinking and action, and of course the uranium issue is one of those, and whether they can contribute to greater contemporary integration of his Anishinaabe, Indigenous approach to knowledge generation in academic discourse. So he'd been influential on environmental issues at the global level. He positioned his approach in many contemporary debates, and that's why, though he died in 2011, he doesn't seem to go away. Focused on uranium, water contamination, mega dumps, eels, damming, habitat protection, species at risk, in the process influencing diverse players. He actually did the opening prayer for the Species at Risk Act. He's well known for his voice of peace building and reconciliation, in his Indigenous rootedness on the land, yet connected with diverse others. So he managed to bridge both worlds. Some of the challenges that we're seeing evolving and erupting around us, he modeled a way to bridge. These others who are part of his Circle of All Nations larger community animate his environmental stewardship and peace-building legacy via the Circle of All Nations discourse. So who is William Commanda? Show up. That on the right-hand side is a panel at the Canadian exhibit in the Museum of History. So he's now officially a part of Canadian history. And Up the Gatineau did an article in their historical journal as well. He's a carrier of the sacred wampum heritage. He's a renowned birch bark canoe maker and craftsman, a political Algonquin leader, chief, founder of the Circle of All Nations, a global eco-community dedicated to advancing environmental stewardship and racial harmony, officer of the Order of Canada and recipient of 2 honorary doctorate degrees. In 2014, the University of Ottawa created a Commanda Hall in recognition of his relevance to academic knowledge. Mikhail Jean had met him when he received the Order of Canada, and that's the panel. Okay, so with respect to environment, my research has led me to conclude that there are limitations to popular contemporary approaches to the environment. For example, environmental ethics, deep ecology, feminist geography. And there's an acceleration in climate change and environmental crises of global impact attest to the urgent need for new, innovative approaches. 3 decades after the Rio Earth Summit, 3 things predominate in environmental issues: the voice and place of the Indigenous, the Western domination of thinking in a world on fire, and global connections and interrelatedness of problems and solutions. So my sister says, Romola, you got a lot of stuff there. You got to share concepts. People grasp concepts sometimes easier than they understand the talk. So with my thesis, this is what we did. I approached it by looking at multiple logics of inquiry so that I could reach a range of people in trying to translate an Indigenous thinker. So with the performance mapping angle, I studied the ideology and in particular the wampum heritage, which inspired William's way of thinking. With the historical review, William Commanda actually met Queen Elizabeth at a garden party, and he showed her this coin that she had given him when he was a chief, when she first assumed her leadership of the Commonwealth. And so frankly, at that garden party, he was the only person who had a genuine relationship with her. And she said, that old thing, you still have it. It triggered something for her. Phenomenological, the reflection, the reflexivity all the time. And the cybercartographical is what we're doing right now in our mapping and our storytelling in digital technology. So I used a geonarrative approach to studying his work, a narrative in telling his historical version of the story. Critical reflexivity allowed me to put my own voice into the thesis, to share what I'd learned and understood. And the cybercartographical mapping allowed for the voice and presence of other people who were part of his circle to contribute to the ongoing journey. So there then our point was nature as the teacher. This is Wazo Rock, and it's imprinted with the pictographs of the first peoples and their knowledge and stories. So there are many themes over here, and especially the prayer for water and how water responds to the energies of people. This last image is from a book by Dr. Emoto, who actually studied water particles and saw how they reacted as much to voice and energy as to anything else. Okay. So this is how then we iterated the William Commanda discourse in our stories about canoes, about the ancient history, the geological history of the land, as well as contemporary history, the boreal forest, the importance of waters, waterfalls that generate oxygen and cure asthma, amongst other things, the spirit of the North, the plight of the polar bear, and the vision for a circle of all nations. His plan was to be created at the Asanabka Sacred Chaudia site and to be comprised of an Indigenous center, peace building, an eco-city park, a historic park that recognized the contributions of the newcomers, and to be a place of reconciliation. This vision was first developed in 2003, was supported initially by the federal government. They put some money towards creating a memorandum of recommendation for Treasury Board. Unfortunately, it was stalled by the sponsorship scandal, amongst other things. The city of Ottawa brought it up again in 2010. William died and left us, abandoned us all, and now the vision and dream still is in dream world. Okay, so I just wanted to say this is really how we've conceptualized our thinking in terms of the Circle of All Nations. This is our methodology. And how did I come to create this? Well, first of all, in the center, we have worked our way around a native medicine wheel. So we go from a place of vision to planning to dreaming to the animation at the community level to the reflection, the quality control, and then the rearticulation is wisdom. And when you break it down into a detail, it becomes the actual projects one does at each of those scales, but following that same kind of methodology. So William loved to teach by obliging me and others to watch many documentaries. And 1 year, we were watching these all the time: Corporations, Fahrenheit 9/11, and the Inconvenient Truth. And, you know, I was a slow learner, but it took me a while. And then I began to understand how it fit around our medicine wheel. And I realized that these were the dominant ideologies that were not presenting us with an opportunity for any wisdom. I translated those documentaries into text, and that included corporate development and greed, war, genocide, themes of environmental destruction, and I noted that the Indigenous wisdom theme was absent. And so then we moved to two. Okay, so let me skip that. The other was a long list of our activities, but let me just go to the two things now that I'd like you to pay a little bit of attention to, because what I'm saying in the end is, after moving away from beautiful landscapes to really understanding relationship with the land awakened me to understand things better, and I think this is why William shared with all of us, because he wanted it to also awaken the same kind of thing with us. So this year, as part of my research, I've been going on road trips where I've traveled with William before. In this infographic, we actually went to Montandiab near Fermeneuve, Quebec. It was a sacred meeting place, vision quest place of the Indigenous peoples. It's a high mountain, and I drove William up there 3 times. It was not easy to get to, but we did it. In 2013, I took his niece and her 2 sons there, and we couldn't reach the top anymore. It was being developed. When I went there this last fall, I took another niece, and we found we couldn't even get that close up, but there was the tree cutting happening. there was moose hunting, moose hanging on the tree, yeah, on the tree, really, literally. While at the same time, in other parts of Lavarandri Park, people were protesting hunting, moose hunting. Okay, so that then was a reflection of what we saw in 2013. Towards the end of October, I went on a visit to Hudson, Oka. And I met with the mayor over there, and we talked about that area. Some of you may know Hudson Oka is a sacred place, original place of the Algonquins, their original meeting place. And what Jamie McNichols shared with me was the Quebec report on the impact of tree cutting in the Basketong Sacred Mountain area on the 2019 flooding at Oka. So then, this is how I want to say, when William Commanda said, pay attention to the tree cutting, soon there won't be any trees to drink up the water. It will lead to the flooding. It will lead to the mudslides. He was hearing a message from the land. It was not heavy-duty science, though it's taken science a long damn time to come anywhere close to understanding this. It's not quantum stuff, though the elements that inspired understanding this might very well be conceived as such. In fact, water was created here in those amazing rocks of the Ottawa watershed, and in that syntropic energy of water, you can see the creation of life force. So those were the kinds of things Indigenous peoples accessed by their deep acquaintance with the land, rocks, water, stars, the cosmic, have tried to translate for us. And I think, as William would say, before the end of time, I hope and pray we all wake up to it and, join in the cause. So, yeah, I know I've packed in a lot. It's hard to do justice to an old guy who lived till 98 and was a historian, never mind about kindergarten dropout, and worked till the day he died to present a vision for something better for all of us. And so I hope I've been able to share a few of his ideas tonight. Thank you.